This episode is brought to you by Merrick Pet Care. For over 30 years, Merrick has crafted high-quality dog food. Since our founding in Hereford, Texas, all of Merrick's recipes have prioritized whole nutrition, with deboned meat, fish, or poultry as the #1 ingredient. That's why we say real is our recipe. Real ingredients and home-style flavors your pet loves. Look for new Merrick packaging with real ingredients shown on the bag and inside it. Find it online or in your local pet store.
Ow.
Those uncomfortable things we do for beauty.
Oof. Ouch.
And when it comes to whiter teeth, same story. Until now. Enjoy rinse-free whitening with new Sensodyne Clinical White. You'll get clinically proven whitening technology in an enamel-safe formula for 2 shades whiter teeth and 24/7 sensitivity protection. Sensodyne Clinical White, a whiter smile without the wince.
And it is one of now 12 sites under investigation in this whole area. But we believe there's up to 30 sites, maybe 40, stretching across an area which is 200 kilometers wide, or about 125 miles wide, going between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, these biblical rivers, which also go all the way down to Mesopotamia, to Iraq as well. And so we have, we have to consider that there's a kind of civilization we're dealing with. It's not just a bunch of sites and a bunch of people making stone circles. It's a whole other thing. I call it a super civilization because I think it's the world's first one. Super civilization. Super civilization.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
All right, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. Today we're going back to the ancient times with Hugh Newman, author, explorer, awesome website, Megalithomania, and Hugh's a great friend of the show, and he's friends with a lot of the guys in this blurry space outside of the traditional academic narrative. Been on a lot of shows. It's funny that I was editing this podcast, and there's Hugh on my TV screen talking about some blurry stuff in Alaska, which I gave him a hard time about, but
you did.
It's fun, to see it all kind of, I'm just doing a little research on my own, and hey, it's our buddy Hugh on TV. Yeah. So,
and he's been great. He's been on. This will be his 3rd time on. So we talked about giants in Britain. We talked about Karahan Tepe, and he's got a brand new book out. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the world's first megaliths, and so he wanted to come on and talk about what they're doing there. They're finding new things all the time. Hugh is such an interesting guy. You might recognize him from, he's been on Ancient Aliens and History Channel, a bunch of different places, talking about things he's discovered. Lives right near Stonehenge. He's definitely a blurry guy who physically lives in a blurry space there, but fascinating. We're going all the way back to the Golden Age, right, to we would say and believe to be the time of the Watchers, right, imparting knowledge to humanity as civilization at Göbekli Tepe pops out of nowhere. And so, as always, right, we go into the Blurryverse. This is the alternate history part of what we talk about, and it not so many bones. This is the Stone Zone.
The Stone Zone. All right.
Stone Zone.
Well, the Stone Zone and the Bone Zone are pretty closely related.
They're like cousins. Yeah.
The Stone Zone. All right, now you got to sell a new T-shirt. Dude.
No, we're not doing that. No.
We are not selling any more merch, but if you want to get involved in what we're doing, you can go to blurrycreatures.com/members. Become a member. You get discounts on merch.
That's right.
We got a lot of stuff for sale. A lot of the phrases we talk about. The Smithsonian has the bones and all these things. Make it onto shirts.
That's right. And so lots of other things, extra episodes, exclusive and private channels for members only. Facebook, Discord, Telegram to talk about all things Blurry. Of course, first crack at all of our events. So upcoming BlurryCon 2 next year. Come join, check it out. Again, that's keep the lights on here and keeps this rolling. But we're grateful to be able to sit down and have conversations with folks that are out there doing the work. They're out there, making discoveries, and Hugh Newman's one of those guys. He's spends a ton of time in Turkey investigating and documenting and trying to begin to understand what's happening in really the most ancient megalithic site on Earth. And so I'm excited to have Hugh back, and it's always good to mix a Brit in every once in a while, Nate. So,
oh yeah,
so we'll have our tea and crumpets and talk with our good friend Hugh Newman.
Oh yeah, that's right. Let's get him on.
You are now entering the Stone Zone.
The Stone Zone. All right. Welcome back to the podcast. Hugh Newman. Hugh, you are in high def now that you got your new camera set up here. We are still blurry, as always, with our old school cameras here. That's how we do it here. That's on brand. But you are an author, explorer, and you have the website Megalithomania as well over in the UK. Finding all the good stuff. You have a new book out, and apparently we have to apologize. You've been listening to our show, so you have to listen to our terrible voices all the time. Thanks for listening, by the way, and congrats on the new book. And welcome back to Blurry Creatures.
This is number 3, Hugh. We had you on to talk about giants in the UK. Yep. We had you on to talk about Karahan Tepe, because you were doing a lot of work on that. Of course, if you've listened to the show, it was a sister city of Göbekli Tepe of much fame, especially in the news as of late. And I know we'll get to that. But third time is a charm. And for the third time, Hugh, I think we'd like to run it back and begin this conversation by asking you what your thoughts are on Bigfoot. If you have any new thoughts on Bigfoot.
I knew you were going to ask that. I don't know how I knew, so I predicted it. But yeah, no, for sure. Well, I think I mentioned before, I'm very interested in British Bigfoot. I've read Nick Redfern's book. I've read a couple of other books. Actually, I kind of got obsessed by it for a while. But relating to what we're going to talk about today, we can look at, Southeast Turkey or Mesopotamia as well. And some of the stories of the Sumerian tradition have the Anunnaki, like one of the Anunnaki, Enki, I think it is, I could be wrong, could be Enlil, but some stories, they have him as a hairy kind of being. He's like a kind of rough-hewn, very hairy body being, which is really bizarre, because it just clocked to me that is that a kind of very early reference to a Bigfoot type creature going back into the many thousands of years ago. So I find that quite odd, because he was because they were kind of gods. They were like gods of the Anunnaki, going back thousands of years. So yeah, I find that really intriguing that comes up sometimes when you're talking about members of the Anunnaki.
And all your giant research, any hairy giants, or are they all kind of like humanoid?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's quite a lot of stories. Yeah, we get quite a lot in Britain. Surprisingly, there's the Grey Man of Ben Macdui. He's like a kind of hairy, kind of growling creature that's on a mountain. People hear his footsteps and his ghostly figure up in Scotland. We have a couple of accounts from Wales of wild, tall men roaming across the land, kind of chasing people. And these are these are the same kind of newspaper reports you're getting in, like where you find the giant skeletons, where you find the different accounts and things like this. So there's quite a few little ones like that, and I've traced a few, and there's quite a few other ones as well that keep popping up. And considering how small Britain is, there's still a lot of wild land here. That's why I was so fascinated by all these accounts that I've been digging into. And the Wild Man book by Nick Redfern, which I think is quite brilliant, actually. He covers so much in that. So yeah, in America as well, obviously, who knows? loads of the skeletons could be Bigfoot skeletons that are found in caves or found in random places, maybe not the ones buried under mounds or megaliths, but we found one, I think, in Dayton, Ohio. I forget the date, but it was like early 1800s, I think. And the story explains this skeleton having really long arm, a very kind of almost like Neanderthal type face with a long head at the back, and really kind of crouched, solid kind of, figure. And it really didn't sound like a human being. I thought, hang on a sec, that sounds like a Bigfoot. Jim never let me live it down because it was found in gravel for some reason. So we came up with this sort of this new theory that Bigfoots are buried in gravel because we had one account of it, but it didn't really get, no traction was formed with that one. So
Hugh, do you think that like the wild man, the Bigfoot of Britain, do you think he's much more polite and proper? Like maybe he, does he howl with an accent, and does he,
Yeah, he's probably wearing like a Peaky Blinders hat.
Yeah, I think he probably breaks from knocking trees down and things for tea. So there's probably a pause in his.
He's
action.
a proper Bigfoot.
A proper.
Well, that's inevitable. That's the culture here. So obviously he's gonna follow the natural culture of Britain.
Yeah, we need it. That sounds like a T-shirt coming. The British Bigfoot, and he's holding the tea.
You leave tea and biscuits out. Yeah. Things like you don't leave carrots and meat.
Right. He's much more polite. He doesn't apologize as much as the Canadian Bigfoot, but that's okay. It feels right. No, but that's not what we're here for. You got a new book that's out, Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the world's first megaliths. This is something we've talked about on the show before, and would love to have you just kind of walk through some of the things that you put in the book, some of the new things. I know that as of at least 3 to 4 weeks ago, they're always discovering new things. And we kind of talked about this in our first episode on this topic with you, that so much of this space is still unexcavated, and yet. I can't remember the number. You can quote this, but there are supposedly you would say there's a bunch of these type of city settlement, like temple kind of structure things all over this area in Turkey. But these two are the ones that have been worked the most. You've spent a ton of time out there, and these are the oldest pieces of civilization, if you will. Start us off wherever you want, because I think this is, to me especially, I love history, in our show so often is about going back to the untold part of history, the alternate history, if you will, because this was a really tough one. If you haven't listened to the episode with you before, this is a really tough one for modern archaeology and modern historians, because the timeline of Karahan and also Göbekli Tepe, these two places, it broke the mold or paradigm, if you will, of what we believed that people were doing, right? This is supposed to be a time of hunter-gatherers, pre-agrarian, supposedly, and so you have these very complex megaliths, stoneworking, sculptures, art, and then kick us off, like Hugh. This is where you've been spending a ton of your time, and a lot of your work has been here in Turkey. You're leading tours and trips to these places. So start us off. Where do we begin with this?
Sure, yeah. I mean, let's start off at Göbekli Tepe. I mean, because this is the big site. This is like now a World Heritage Site, and it is one of now 12 sites under investigation in this whole area. But we believe there's up to 30 sites, maybe 40, stretching across an area which is 200 kilometers wide, or about 125 miles wide, going between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, these biblical rivers, which also go all the way down to Mesopotamia, to Iraq as well. And so we have, we have to consider that there's a kind of civilization we're dealing with. It's not just a bunch of sites and a bunch of people making stone circles. It's a whole other thing. I call it a super civilization because I think it's the world's first one. And there's lots of evidence to back this up. But let's start with Göbekli Tepe, because this was discovered back in mid-90s, by Klaus Schmidt. It was actually originally kind of recorded back in the 1960s by a certain gentleman called Peter Benedict, but they didn't realize the significance back then. They kind of got forgotten about. And on the top of this hill, it was like this hill that sticks out the kind of the Anti-Taurus mountain range, just north of Şanlıurfa in southeast Turkey. And there was this mulberry tree, and they called it the wish tree. And for years, hundreds of years, women have been going there, and people have been going there to like try and gain fertility and wish for fertility, to give birth, to have a healthy pregnancy, or to try and become fertile for it if they can't have babies, and also for wishes. And it's all the names are associated with this. Like the Göbekli Tepe translates as pot belly hill or navel hill. There are other translations in Kurdish and Armenian that talk about the hill of miracles, the wishing hill, and all these different variations. And so it was a known site where people would go to and they still do it today. It's still part of a tradition that goes way, way back, especially with the Kurdish people as well. And so that is intriguing because it was almost like a memory of something important there. And, the fact is, when it was discovered in the 90s, and this is like all the sites pretty much, they were all deliberately covered over at the end of their use, after a couple of thousand years of use, like 10,000 years ago or so. And so they were forgotten about. All these civilizations were coming through there, the Hittites, the Sumerians, the Christians, the Romans, everyone else. And no one knew about them. They just weren't, it was just a distant memory. A few legends kind of may have recalled what was going on. So these, it's rewriting history in its own right. And only now this is happening. So it really is a remarkable time of discovery. But Göbekli Tepe is really the big site everyone talks about. It's got a visitor center there. You have to get mini buses up to the top. You have to buy tickets. Karahan Tepe started that process, and that's only just really opened. It's not even officially open, and they kind of got things in place there. But we could talk more about that. But Göbekli Tepe, for people who just don't know, for instance, let's just quickly explain it in case people are just going, "What the hell is he talking about?" And basically, it's a series of there's potentially 20 stone circular structures there. Only about 4 or 5 have been excavated in the south east corner. And these are almost like stone circles, like almost as big as Stonehenge, some of them are. But they have two big upright T-shaped pillars in the center, sort of almost balanced on these huge pedestals. And then around them, around the edge, you have generally 12 other T-shaped pillars, are slightly smaller ones. And these are all very tall. Like the ones in the middle are 18 feet tall, or 5.5 meters. And the ones on the outside are like between 3 and 4 meters tall, sometimes up to 5 in some cases. And so, and then they've got carved, bedrock floors out of limestone, beautiful relief carvings on them of different animals, figures, human statues. The central T-pillars are really like abstract humans with arms coming down the side, wearing belts, with pelts coming down, fox pelts coming down the front, with blank sort of heads as the kind of T part on top. And so these are really abstract, really unique, really beautifully created, crafted sites. And it appears like it came out of nowhere, but we do know there is a timeline before that of other sites. We can talk about those if you like, that do kind of build up to this.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. Like, just so put it in perspective for people, right? Like, so we're talking the time of this, right? We're looking like almost 6,000 years before the Sumerians, correct?
Big time. It's basically the end of the last ice age, 9,600 BC, 11,600 years ago. So let's remember, if this Younger Dryas impact hypothesis was, and this ice age really ended in 9,800 BC. So we're talking like a 200-year period or less between the end of the last ice age, when it started warming up, and the sudden construction of Göbekli Tepe and these other sites. But even during the ice age, going back like 12,000 to 13,000 years ago, there are sites. There are actual built sites. Like there's a bunch of them further east or northeast along the Tigris River. These include Bonchoklu Tala, which means field of beads. We've visited this recently. A few megaliths there, and these kind of sunken enclosures and beautiful carvings, hundreds of thousands of these beads they created. There's another site called Göbekli Tepe, which is along the Tigris River. This again is older. This is 1,000 years older than Göbekli Tepe. Wow. And these were hunter-gatherer. These were all hunter-gatherer populations. They weren't growing food, they weren't domesticating animals. There was hints of that happening. But Göbekli Tepe, they had structures, even though they still went out hunting and gathering and collecting plants and things like that. You have another site called Grifilahoyek, which is slightly further north of there. And these, again, we have these kind of enclosures with sort of pillars, but they were built of like small bricks into these big pillars. We don't have any T-pillars at these sites, but we do have evidence of relief carving, because at Göbekli Tepe, for instance, we have these small kind of handheld stones that were carved beautifully with 3D reliefs, kind of flat reliefs on them of these abstract forms, these different animals and symbols. So that idea seems to have been around 1,000 years before Göbekli Tepe at this site called Göbekli Tepe.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride or die stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
Now, there's another site not too far from Göbekli Tepe, southwest of there, called Çakmak Tepe. That has been exposed just recently. It's currently under excavation. Again, no T-pillars there, we don't think, but we know that is, again, at least a few hundred to 1,000 years older than Göbekli Tepe, and they were doing things there. We know that. We're not sure what. Not too much construction, but they were carving shapes out of bedrock, we know. So there was a development in this landscape of these different cultures, and it almost feels like there was a kind of migration down from the northeast, from the Tigris rivers areas, from Lake Van and all that, coming down and like integrating with the people who were coming in probably from other areas around this area of Şanlıurfa near Göbekli Tepe. And that's when this innovation really kicked off. And now why that happened and why there was such a sudden impact of kind of civilized arts and sciences suddenly occurring is really inexplicable, even with all this kind of background and development before that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's just like there's a lot to think about, when you're trying to work out who was coming in from where and why this happened.
Is there evidence that people lived here, or is this kind of like an ancient Tesla charging station, like where people show up and they recharge and then they leave? Or is there evidence like there was people lived in this location? Because some of these places just seem like out in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, is there some sort of energy coming from the earth that they tapped into and they knew about, so they built this structure there? Or is it is it just there was a society of people that lived here at one point?
Well, funnily enough, let's just talk about the energy coming in from the earth first, because there was some tests done in the early 2000s by Paolo de Bertolis of the University of Trieste. And they did some acoustic tests there first, which we can talk about later maybe. But what they also did was they did some magnetometer testing. And they found in the middle of enclosure D, the main largest enclosure at Göbekli Tepe, this spiraling magnetic field naturally occurring there, coming out of the ground. So what you said might be right. They may have chosen the site because it had an effect on people when they would go to this hill. It had this magnetic charge and it could affect your consciousness. There may have been strange lights, or they felt energy there. And it's this, and then it appears they built the site around this particular spot. So I find that really, really interesting that is the case. And so, but yeah, and you mentioned, like, did people live there? Now, for a long time, like Klaus Schmidt, the head archaeologist back then, he was, he's passed away now. He claimed that this was like a temple site, the world's first temple. These weren't really living quarters. These weren't where people. There's no rivers near Göbekli Tepe. There's no rivers or streams or anything near Karahan Tepe. There are other sites like Navali Chori, Chayanu, and even the Tigris River settlements. They are near rivers, and it's much more obvious that people were living there at some of these sites, with smaller temples built into the kind of villages and things like this. But to me, it feels like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe are completely temple sites. You go to, you do your thing, you have pilgrimage there, you might stay there a few nights and then head out or whatever. That's what I think, even because they found all these small structures now around the main enclosures, which they think people may have lived in or stayed in. But the weird thing is, all these little structures have got like small T-pillars in them, like T-shaped pillars, like with carvings on them. So it's like, if you were living there, why would you have sort of sacred objects and carvings and things like this there? So yeah, and we know the only way they had water in these areas was through collecting and harvesting rainwater and collecting them into these bell-shaped underground kind of cisterns, with big stones on top to protect them from dust and debris getting in. And so and we know a bunch of them. There were a bunch of them in and around Göbekli Tepe, around Karahan Tepe, and a few of the other sites. So yes, a lot of these aren't near water sources, which is really, really odd. But some of the sites are. Like there's one called Ayan La Hoyak, huge site. It's not even been excavated yet. I've got a whole story I could tell you about that. But there's a spring there at that particular site, and actually it feeds a stream that goes all the way into Shanlerfa, which feeds the pools of Abraham and the sort of sacred center of the city of Shanlerfa. So yeah, there's a lot to consider. I mean, the archaeologists now are trying to push this idea that these are domestic sites, and the temple spaces, the stone circles, are community spaces. They're not temples. They're not used for sacred purposes, which I think is wrong. I think these were very much like ceremonial ritual sites, but also innovation centers and teaching places and things like this.
They've been charging tickets to Göbekli Tepe since the beginning, right? Selling tickets.
Quite possibly.
We talked about this in a previous show on Karahan Tepe. The enigma here, of course, is the explosion of technology, right? And a lot of what we do on our show is talk about looking at all these things, ancient history and all the blurry stuff through this biblical lens. And we had talked about the Watchers, right? The story of Enoch, and I know you're close with Graham Hancock, and it's a very similar narrative there. There's this interjection of technology, and from a biblical worldview, you have this Genesis 6 event, and of course, First Enoch is this expose on Genesis 6 and the fall of the Watchers and their impartation of teaching humanity. There's all this stuff that's happening in a place that's not supposed to happen. Can you talk about the vulture stone? I mean, that was something that I hadn't heard about. You touched on it in your book, but it's like the Rosetta Stone of Göbekli Tepe, and I think it's fascinating because on this stone is all this stuff that is it's advanced astronomy, advanced mathematics. It's tracking stars, it's tracking lunar calendars. It's actually like a linchpin for figuring out how to date this place as well, right? I wanted you to explain it because you've done the studies, but I thought that was something we didn't really talk about. I think is just fascinating because you have all of this knowledge that is then recorded in stone.
Yeah, I think all of that it seems to have been found there. I mean, let's just talk about like the idea of the Watchers as well. I mean, this is something that actually Klaus Schmidt, the head archaeologist there for a long time, actually talked about. He actually talked about the Watchers and possibly the Anunnaki being involved in the original construction and innovation at these sites. Because we know if we look at the Book of Enoch and you hear about the Watchers or the angels, I mean, I think your listeners know about this. They had these different Watchers, different angels had different technology or technological skills or different things that they were specialized in, and whether it was astronomy, studying the stars, it was like landscape, there's even like talking about going off and measuring, so metrology and surveying,
weaponry, pharmakia, right? You had all these of these things,
working with plants, agriculture, irrigation, everything else. And so you have all these kind of elements developing and being innovated at sites like Göbekli Tepe. So we have to question now, was the Book of Enoch, were the Sumerian stories of the Anunnaki actually talking about this era and these places, and were they the original kind of builders? And I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot of speculations been going on about that, but you start looking into, I mean, JJ Ainsworth and I have been looking into the Sumerian work, and you start looking at that carefully and decoding it a little bit and kind of placing it towards Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. Some of it all starts to fit. Loads of it starts to fit quite strangely. And so, I find that really intriguing, especially because they were said to be interested in the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the landscape surveying, geomancy, and things like this. So we have the magnetism we've already mentioned as part of geomancy. We have Villa 43, or the vulture stone you mentioned. I mean, this has got all sorts of remarkable symbolism on it. I mean, it's probably the most decorated stone discovered anywhere in the region so far. That is an enclosure D. That's the same enclosure with the magnetic anomaly. That's just left, or just to one side of the hold stone, the porthole stone, which is more or less north. So it's just the one side of that. You can just about make it out when you go and visit there. You can zoom in on your camera to get a view of it. And that's got the carvings on there are just ridiculous. I mean, you have this sort of vulture thing, holding a ball or a head or a sphere in his hand. You have a scorpion on the bottom. You have what some people call man bags at the top, which we're not sure exactly what they are. All these zigzags on it, different animals, a headless man. You have cranes on it. You have different birds and creatures all over it. And it's been decoded by people like Andrew Collins, Martin Sweatman, and Graham Hancock's had a go at it as well and trying to work it all out. And they all say similar things, and they're not exactly the same. Some people say the ball is the sun. Someone else say it's the center of the celestial sphere. Others say it's, it could be another, astronomical kind of symbol and things like this. But they all generally, it looks like it was a representation of what was going on in the sky. And I think that's the fundamental thing. So it kind of proves, pretty much beyond doubt. I mean, I know Martin Sweatman has done a huge amount of statistical analysis, and it's kind of beyond doubt now. A lot of the symbolism we find at these sites is astronomical and astrological. I mean, there's a site, this is really intriguing. There's a site called Sayburch. This is like one of the main sites being uncovered. And just the name of it, I'll just mention the name of it, because Sayburch, if you split it into two, say means, in Turkish, it means counting or numbers. And Birch, B-U-R-C, with a little thing off the bottom of the C, means sign of the zodiac. And Birch, B-I-R-C, in Kurdish means watchtower or tower. And there used to actually be a tower there that got demolished. And so just one name, Sayburch, kind of explains what is being found at these sites, which is very, very intriguing.
And then we went to Peru this year in June, and they're almost impossible to understand how they did this, right? But the crazy thing about those things is that they are all precisely celestially aligned, right? So there was just an unbelievable grasp and knowledge of astronomy, and they were super specific about what they, the way they set things up. So when you look at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, what are they? Because I know a lot of different temples and places and megaliths across the world key on certain either constellations or stars. Is there specifics that these people that built Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe that they keyed in on and aligned these structures with?
Yeah, there is. I mean, there's something that I think we mentioned last time. Myself and JJ Ainsworth, my partner, we visited there in December 2021, and we're there on the winter solstice. And this is one discovery, one alignment out of many others we believe are there. But this winter solstice thing, the thing that's important about this is that, number one, it's not a hypothesis or a theory or speculation. It's a directly observable event, which anyone can go and see today. Even 9,000 or so years, 11,000 years ago, that would have been even better. It would have been a slightly better alignment because the sun's slightly further to the south on the horizon back then. And so this is kind of solidifies that they were watching the sun, the moon, and the stars. So that alone is enough to kind of back up all these other ideas that they were watching the sky and they were observing the sky. Andrew Collins, for instance, he's done a lot of research at Göbekli Tepe and now at Karahan Tepe, focusing on the northern sky, because a lot of these enclosures are kind of orientated like almost north-south or just off. And the northern section in the wall, they have these hole stones, these porthole stones. And if you kind of align them and look at the different orientations, they almost like track the different movements of Cygnus or Deneb in Cygnus, which is towards the center of the Milky Way, the dark rift. And this is all part of the kind of death rebirth cycle in cosmology. And others say they actually sort of face to the south because the T-shaped pillar kind of anthropomorphic figures or human figures look that direction, look to the south. And some people have said Sirius was starting to rise back then. We have Orion, we have other features in the sky like Taurus and the Pleiades, and many of these are kind of represented, carved. JJ Ainsworth is doing a whole bunch of new research looking at the looking at the Golden Gate of the ecliptic, and the way all the symbols we're finding at Göbekli Tepe are kind of part of what is moving through the sky over huge periods of time. So that's new research, which she's working on now. I'm helping her with it as well. So it's without a doubt, they were doing this. And so, that's why I love the fact that the name of Saybirch actually kind of gives it away, so I really believe these, I personally believe these were open air, especially the main enclosures, were open air temples, or if they had roofs on, which is a big debate about this, I don't really 100% go with, that they were openings to watch the sky in certain times of the movements through the year.
Hugh, do you think sort of when we were in Peru, you can kind of see how at the base level construction is immaculate, and then it kind of gets crappy over the decades, years, and people just sort of forget how to build the way they used to build. But I'm just wondering if there's in some of these really old sites where you can kind of see where humans were starting to get things going, and then all of a sudden this explosion of technology came in. Because I mean, really, the only technology that's survived is the stonework for the most part. So it's a little bit harder. I don't know if that question makes sense, but.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at, in Peru and Bolivia and all that, it seems like the earlier, larger, more sophisticated stuff is the older stuff, and everything else is built on top of it. Yeah. But there is, I think, even there, you can trace back a kind of more primitive build up to that, in some respects. But I don't. But it is shocking, when you go to Peru and you see those walls at Sacsayhuaman and Machu Picchu and other places. It's utterly mind blowing, and it's similar in actually down in southeast Turkey, because for a long time people weren't aware of like Göbekli Tepe or these sites up near the Tigris or Çakmak Tepe and places like this. They weren't aware there was really anything before Göbekli Tepe. So for a long time, people thought just Göbekli Tepe just went boom out of nowhere, just bang. And that is, I mean, in a sense, that is true, because these sites don't really explain how they suddenly came up with this remarkable, huge megalithic stone circle complex, structures with carvings and alignments and abstract art. It was like a genius just came in and said, right, this is what we're doing, and he knew exactly what they were doing. It seems like it has this genius level of sophistication and quality. This is why a lot of people, when they go to you go to Peru, you go to Egypt, you go to Göbekli Tepe, you just think, God, aliens must have done this. I mean, it's the only explanation, because it's so outrageous for the time. It just doesn't make sense. But if you study, if you look into it, you look into the archaeological record, you can find lead ups in certain way that kind of get to that point. But I think the polygonal stonework in Peru is absolutely insane. I mean, I have to admit that, because you get that in Turkey as well. You get that quite a lot of areas of Turkey. The Hittites were doing that around 2000 BC. You have the southern coast, you have a whole bunch of sites. There's a site called Maiden Kalesi and a bunch of others. We visited these and made videos about them. They're giant polygonal stonework. You could just imagine you walking around Cusco or like Sacsayhuaman, not quite as big, but definitely the same style. So how are we finding these in different parts of the world, the same abstract kind of design of these megalithic walls? And I mean, there's weird similarities with Peru, with Göbekli Tepe as well. I just mentioned this because it's kind of fun. If you go to sites, I don't know if you went to Silastani or Cotimbo, which they're down near Lake Titicaca, still on the Peruvian side.
So we didn't get there.
If you get down there, but even you see similar stuff on the walls of Cusco as well. These sort of 3D relief serpents and other sort of features, carved, kind of sticking out of the stone. And that style, especially at Silastani and Cotimbo, some of the lizards and birds and other creatures carved onto the polygonal kind of towers you find in this area, these chilpa towers, is identical to Göbekli Tepe. It's really, really bizarre. I pointed this out. Graham Hancock did a whole spread on this in his book, Magicians of the Gods, because he was so blown away by it when he went there. Because I went to the same sites as well. And also, we're finding geodetic connections between Göbekli Tepe and Peru and other places. We do a whole section in the book about this. Like, for instance, I found this years ago, actually, and if you draw a line, which I like doing on Google Earth, between the center of Göbekli Tepe, enclosure D, to the Coricancha in Peru, which I know you went to.
Yeah.
And that's like the navel, that's like the center of the Inca and possibly pre-Inca builders. That's like the center. That's like the kind of where all them lines come out from. Yeah. So if you join the center of that with the center of Göbekli Tepe and measure the distance across the planet, it's exactly 7,928 miles. Now, for those that don't know, 7,928 miles is 7,000. Yeah, is the equatorial diameter of the Earth exactly. And so they were kind of marking that between these centers. And also, the canonical number of the diameter of the Earth is 7,920 miles, 7,920. And that's 8 times 9 times 10 times 11. You get that number. And that's part of the ancient canon of measure of the ancient world. And so we have to question, was the center of Cuzco originally placed and marked based upon the position in relation to Göbekli Tepe? And I know that sounds crazy, but otherwise, this is a wild coincidence. We have to kind of consider that the influence of Göbekli Tepe could have reached all the way around the planet.
Hugh, are there other places that you could consider megalithic or ancient places that also have connections, if you will, like as you talk about geodetic associations?
Oh yeah, there are a bunch. Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned this previously. There's you look at Easter Island's really intriguing. The more that comes out of Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe, the more it looks like you're looking at the statues on Easter Island. They have the hands always coming around the navel and the belly button. You have the thin arms coming down the side. You have these kind of really kind of monumental statues. There's arguments about the position. I've got a whole thing in this book. I'll just give you some numbers here. I can't remember all the numbers off the top of my head. So you have Easter Island having the similarities in look and style, and I know people like Robert Schocker claiming that is much older than people think, because they say it's only a few hundred or couple thousand years old. It's actually much, much older. We have the kind of statues found on Sulawesi in Indonesia as well, which almost look like Easter Island and some of the statues there. We have the Tiwanaku statues in Bolivia as well, which are very similar. The whole path of Viracocha stuff there. And so there are lots of similarities in style, but also in the geodetic placement of many of these sites. And there's quite a few have been found. We have Baalbek, for instance, down in Lebanon. And Howard Crowhurst, good friend of mine, but he's also a brilliant geometer and mathematician. He's worked out landscape geometries linking up lots of different sites. And he found that Göbekli Tepe and Baalbek, if you draw a line between them, it marks a diagonal of a perfect 6 square block. And this is called, when you place in squares next to each other to try and work out angles and geometry, that's called modular geometry. And he's found that perfectly aligns. And Baalbek is actually orientated towards Göbekli Tepe as well. And so you have little things like that which don't make sense, plus the whole Peruvian thing as well. We have Delphi, let me check the numbers here, which is exactly 900 miles, or it's 5 million Samian feet, a certain length of foot, between Göbekli Tepe and Delphi. And Delphi is known as a kind of one of the sites, which is like a surveying point site. It's like Omphalos, where they have this sacred kind of egg-shaped statue in the center of it. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. Right. There's lots of other comparisons we can keep making. Let's just have a look at one more here. So interestingly, there's a measurement, because I know I'm really interested in ancient metrology. There's a measurement called the Persian foot, which we found over and over again in Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and that's 1.05 English feet, and 5 million of those is the distance between the middle of Göbekli Tepe and the middle of Stonehenge, for instance. And at Stonehenge, they've actually found some 10,000-year-old pine post holes, giant great things, 3 or 4 feet wide, which would hold giant, pillars. And so we're looking at something quite remarkable going on around the world at this time. So that's just a few examples. Yeah. We've got a whole load more in the book.
Well, how do you think they're getting this knowledge? Do you think that there are like actual entities showing up, teaching them taking them through the ancient engineering class and saying, this is how you make this stuff? Or if there were, like we said on our show, a lot of times, like if these watchers were interbreeding with society, that they're somewhere around checking in on things, like a foreman on a job site. Like, I mean, are UFOs dropping down and dropping off, these guys with the information, with the blueprints? I mean, how is this knowledge going from somewhere else to us? Because obviously we all agree that this isn't just something somebody dreamt and then, this is how we built it. It came from somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the innovation levels there are just incredible. I mean, you've got megalithic construction, you've got geometry, the laying out them in a specific geometrical pattern. This has been proven now. I've got new research on this, which I've started to. We mention it in the book. We're finding, specific precision geometries like we find in Britain, stone circles in Göbekli Tepe, where we have acoustics as evidence of archaeoacoustic properties in many of the enclosures. They developed agriculture there. We know that agriculture and animal domestication happened after the construction of Göbekli Tepe, within 200 years.
Wow.
We have irrigation, we have working with water, we have the magnetism now as well. And there's even evidence, something that JJ's been looking at closely actually, of a writing system in place based upon the symbols found at Göbekli Tepe. And this is what's called Luwian script, and this is like a Hittite script, which has also been analysed by Robert Schock and another gentleman called Manu, who's written a paper on it as well, where they believe that, and so does JJ, that this may have been a memory of what was actually being innovated at Göbekli Tepe and the sites in that area, because the symbols are the same, and there's even names for God and things like this. So yeah, the innovation level is incredible, but where did that come from? Like you said, it's like, to me, it feels like this was a coming together of numerous groups who were just, and they must have had some genius level people in their groups. But also, this is like the Terence McKenna territory we can get into now. There was innovation of the mind and the sort of brainscape, if you like, through the ingestion of substances which were naturally occurring in the landscape around this area. Because we know that, psilocybin mushrooms grew there. We know they were brewing beer, which often when you use barley to grow beer, a side product of that is LSD type substance called ergot, which is which actually was LSD was produced from. And so that can happen when you bake bread as well, when it goes moldy. Also, there's grasses that have been found that grew abundantly in the area, are rich in DMT. If you burn huge amounts of it in a small enclosed space, you can actually get an effect from that. So you imagine, if they're accidentally drinking LSD infused beer, they're going to get inspired. They're not going to be like kind of
right,
dim-witted kind of hunter-gatherers. These are like serious. So I think there's a combination of innovation, genius level people coming together and like working out. We have to create a plan, because we've survived this Younger Dryas, we've survived this kind of cataclysm. And we need to kind of, put all our knowledge into one area, into one place. And it could be, the carvings could represent a kind of ancestral history. It could represent teachings that they're teaching people as they're coming into the area. It could be, ceremonial and ritual. It could be, and other things like this. So there's lots of possibilities. But I think that, what I've mentioned there is kind of hitting that, some truth in that, I believe.
Nowadays they would have started a jam band, so maybe they put that to work and did some construction. I know you covered that in the book. It's really fascinating to think about sort of the byproducts of some of the things they were creating. And the ergot thing with the beer is really interesting, that these sort of have these sort of psychedelic aspect to them. And we actually just did an episode, we talked about psychedelics yesterday, Nate.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we talked about it last night.
Which is fascinating. Yeah,
it seems like people are meeting with entities as opposed to just having hallucinations and getting inspiration.
Or starting a jam band, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are different types of drugs. There are drugs where you do hallucinate, and then there are drugs where it sounds like you're meeting something, and you're communicating with, because everyone's having the same experience. And if everyone was hallucinating, then all the stories would be different. Yeah. But just like stories of Bigfoot, Luke, they all seem to be the same.
It's wild.
But it's true that I agree with you. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for that, and that it's people don't realize the significance and the profound effect it can have on you as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research being done currently, and the testing is carried out on this. I mean, yeah, certainly it feels like you're kind of connecting to something greater, and there's a kind of a higher intelligence around you. You kind of tap into that, and the more you take it, the more you tap into it. This is where many of these myths and rituals, and even like starting to work with calendars and trying to communicate in different ways would potentially come from. But I mean, I personally think the Watchers, or the Anunnaki, or a combination, if they're the same people, we don't know. They were doing this as well. That they understood, the natural, because we know they studied plants and herbs and sacraments and things like this. It's written down. It's in the Book of Enoch and things like this. And so it's like they don't actually say these are psychedelic drugs. They say different things, and they go off and take flight, and they go to measure, and they kind of go up at what appears to be flying through the sky into these different realms and other such things. But is that an actual interpretation of actually the ingestion of such plants? Where everyone's shining all the time and things like this.
Yeah, and I know that Graham Hancock's working on, that when he was on Rogan, he was talking about how they're working on trying to map places by elongating people's DMT experiences. And we talked about this actually again last night, where we were talking about like just these steps in order to activate DMT. It's a learned process. I don't think it's a trial and error process. I think that's so complicated in some ways to concentrate, that it absolutely, to me, 100% feels like something that has to be learned and was taught from someone who had that knowledge. It's interesting. I know there's a lot of folks that have done a lot of, and are doing a lot of research on sort of trying to understand that. But as Nate said, it's fascinating that people seem to have all the same experiences. They see machine elves. They see the same shiny entities. They talk to them. A lot of times they say the same things to them. And I can't help but wonder if like this is, after the Watchers are gone, that this is perhaps how they taught folks to interact with them when they were no longer walking among humanity. I don't know. That's just me sort of riffing on that, but you have to wonder if there's not like sort of like the telephone, right? And then you pick up the phone, and that's the way they taught folks how to do it.
And yeah, I mean, you just wonder if they were like holed up somewhere, or they had to do some sort of ritual to access this information, because it seems ubiquitous. It seems everywhere. It seems like they all kind of knew somehow. Either they started in ground zero and spread out with this knowledge in their heads, or someone was dropping it off here and there. And when they didn't know what they were supposed to do, they could go back and, you just like any old construction, you got the little foreman's shop, and you go and like, what are we supposed to do now? Right? Oh, you have to build this and that. And okay. And there's a guy on site that's making sure that the building is, obviously we do things a little bit different now, but I still think there's some similar elements there. And when you're talking about like that giant that was found in the gravel, right? It was kind of mutated, and it was all funky, and there was a lot of inbreeding going on between these sort of giant tribes or hybrid tribes. Are they building these fertility sites because they're genetically maybe messed up and they're not able to produce as much as they'd like, or there's a lot of inbreeding going on? I mean, some of them have long heads, multiple fingers, and they sound kind of like Frankenstein creatures walking around, and maybe they have a lot of problems, like a lot of physical ailments, but they're trying to maintain that sort of royalty, or that hey, I'm not a normal human. I'm a step up from that, kind of thing. You think that's involved in some of these sites?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned like any kind of deformities. I mean, there's actually elongated skulls have been found, not right near Göbekli Tepe. They've been found more in Iran, in the Zagros Mountains, that kind of area, going back to nearly 9,000 years. I mean, this is incredible. And there's a whole culture of it going right up into the Ubaid culture, who were around before the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. But there's hundreds of skulls and cultures of people who would headbind, and some of them look like they're natural as well, which is really bizarre. So you do get that, not necessarily at Göbekli Tepe, but you do get that in that kind of region of the world. And so, yeah, but I think the one of the reasons they were kind of innovating at these sites as well is because I think there was a big influence by some genius level people. This could be the Watchers, this could be the Anunnaki, whoever, don't know. But there's also the fact that they're just coming out of this dark spell, this ice age, and weather started warming up just before they built Göbekli Tepe. And if there was a cataclysm, if this Younger Dryas thing is a reality, and there was horrific weather, there was animals dying off, crops being destroyed, natural resources drying up, flooding in some areas, just debilitating the soil. then they had to come up with some kind of community effort to survive and to like think about the future generations as well. And so it could be a combination of lots of different things. And so I think that's why they had to, develop ways to survive. And I think part of that was the development of like basic agriculture and like domesticating the wheat and the acorn wheat and other such things in that area.
Hey Hugh, the guy that heads up the excavations for the Turkish, I don't know, antiquities or whoever it is, I mean, he's basically said that the new discoveries never end. And even in the last month, they discovered new things. And I kind of wanted to get you to unwrap and kind of in your take on the brand new stuff, right? And I know that they're finding new monumental statues. They found what they believe to be the oldest painted statue in recorded history. And I wanted you just to kind of share with our audience what they're finding, because you're someone who has your finger on the pulse of what's going on down there. I mean, you're writing books about the space or taking people down there. In just the last month, really, or even you want to go back in the last 3 months, what have they been finding, and what is that has that changed our thoughts on anything that's going on there, or has it broadened our understanding of what we think it went on there, and what the purposes of and what the people were doing?
Yeah, there's some remarkable discoveries have been made. I wrote an article about it. I made a couple of videos about it because we were there when these were being discovered, actually. Wow. But they wouldn't show us them because we weren't officials and archaeologists or anything. But we knew they were there. We even had the guy on site describing them to us, but he couldn't show us any photos. So we knew what was going on. We knew there was discoveries. We came home, and then it got announced quite quickly. So luckily our friend was there, who's our tour manager over there, and he just happened to be at the site on the day they announced it. The one day anyone could get any photos, and he got a load of, he managed to kind of get access to it, and so that was really helpful. And so, yeah, they found some amazing things. There's a new enclosure at the top of Karahan Tepe. Start there. And this, we saw that, through the month because we went there a few times in September. And there's a giant enclosures basically being uncovered at the top with this huge hold stone, again, towards the north, which fits in again with Andrew Collins' theories of Cygnus alignments and everything else. Yeah. But then we knew there was some other stuff that had been found as well. We were getting rumors of it, and eventually it came out. So one of the things, there was a small vulture statue below it's probably about this big. It's probably like 2 or 3 feet tall. Yeah. And that was just below the porthole stone. Vulture is a symbol of Cygnus or Deneb in the night sky, which is interesting. But next to that, on the right, was this 7.5 foot tall statue of a seated figure, which was originally broken in 3 parts. And he's holding his phallus. You can see his ribs as well. He's got a little square thing carved here as well. But he's also got what appears to be a beard and a piece coming down here. And shaved area above his ears, because he carved out. It's almost like wearing a helmet, and like it's got this perfectly carved, shaped haircut, almost like a short mullet. And it was just like, whoa! But it was a really interesting, accurate human depiction. But the thing is, he was 7.5 feet tall. He was a giant, basically. Yeah. And so that really intrigued, because previously they found statues in Urfa, Şanlıurfa, the Urfa man statue. And that's a life-size statue. That's 5'9", or 1.8 meters, whereas this is 2.3 meters or 7.5 feet. So why was this so damn big? It was just absolutely huge. And so that really, really, intrigued me. And Andrew was convinced, right? Okay, because he was with me when we were doing all this, and he was like, Andrew Collins. He said, "Look, this could be an Anunnaki. This could be like the first depiction ever seen, the earliest statue of an Anunnaki," which it kind of clicked. I was like, oh my God, maybe it is. Maybe it is this special. Right. And so, yeah, but it has the fertility symbolism, holding his phallus. You get a lot of that kind of set. You get that say birch. You found Urfa Man has that as well. You have this V-neck thing as well, which is very much a symbol of the time. Whoever these played this sort of V-neck motif, Star Trek style. And so yes, and they also found another one. They found loads already. This giant stone plate, which is beautifully carved again, and it's like polished hard stone, as though it's kind of almost like machined, like you get in Egypt or something. Yeah. So that was all the stuff from Karahan Tepe, even though there's a whole load more that's been found there over the last year or two. But then we go to Göbekli Tepe, and they found, while we were there, they were excavating there as well. There's a whole bunch of archaeologists cleaning it up, and they discovered in Enclosure D again, just in front of the hold stone in Enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe, they found this giant it's like a life-size boar. It's like, 4 feet wide or something. And it was really nicely created. It was just placed there. They found a kind of slab underneath it with these beautiful H's and serpents and serpent head carved on it. And that was sort of sitting underneath the boar. But the boar, as you mentioned, had 3 different types of pigment on it, like a red, a black, and a white paint almost. Different parts of it were painted in different color. And there was enough on it for them to determine what was going on. And they claimed this was the earliest ever statue that has this on it. But actually, a few years ago, in enclosure C, they found another boar, and they found red pigment in that one. So this isn't technically the earliest paint they found. It's actually, they found 3 colors on this one. But also in that enclosure, they found another fallen T-pillar, almost on its side, like it's standing up, like it's gone on its side. And then it's got another hole, almost 2 holes almost carved through it, which we'd never seen before either. So there's quite a few new things coming out of the ground there. So they're the main ones that have been discovered, but there's more being discovered at Saybirch. We went there, we witnessed a human skeleton in a pit. We saw a giant U-shaped, perfectly carved, like a big window, half a window carved out of solid rock. Huge, great thing. Other features have been found there as well. We even explored 100 meter long, 300 foot long tunnel carved into solid bedrock.
Wow.
Perfectly, like beautifully carved all the way down. And it kind of got thinner as it went down in sections. There were carved stones at the bottom, and no one even knows about this. This is something we got to know the locals and got access to this. This is near one of the sites, actually. We're not allowed to say exactly where it is at the moment. And no one knows about it. And like, we're just like, what the hell? This is like massive. If this is as old as this, or, maybe it was carved later, but still, who carved it?
Right.
We don't know who did it. Even if it was carved a couple of thousand years ago, it's mind blowing. So that's a new thing as well. So that's something that just me and Andrew and JJ kind of sussed out when we were there on this last trip.
To me, it always seems interesting that the giants just die off. They die out somehow, right? And you hear rumors that they had all kinds of problems and issues, blood diseases and other things, and you wonder if some of the early ones were building some of these sites to try to increase their fertility, and that's why you see all this phallic stuff all over the place. And it's like they're not supposed to be here. They're sort of a genetic mutation that kind of got forced into humanity, and they probably had a lot of issues and problems. But I wanted to ask a question. Do you see, obviously the UFO conversation's coming up a lot these days. Is there any UFO sightings in these areas or crop circle stuff around the areas? Is there any evidence that this ancient stuff and this modern, phenomena is connected at all, or is that just wishful thinking on my end?
Well, we know, for instance, that there's magnetic anomalies. We know that for sure now at Göbekli Tepe. Let's just rewind one other thing you mentioned there first, where you mentioned like they're trying to increase fertility, increase kind of vitality somehow by somehow working that into the sites. And we think that's a big deal. We think that's a reality. And actually, we're writing about that now in an article we're doing. Me and JJ, it's going to be part of another book as well. And we both believe that the winter solstice alignment at Karahan Tepe is part of this annual cycle to increase fertility, to increase virility, to increase energy in the land and in the people and in the consciousness and in the plants, the animals and everything else. And because loads of other cultures, if you look back and carefully study their traditions, you find the same kind of thing, that there was like wild dancing, sexual rites, birthing chambers and things like this. And this was all about fertility and regeneration and health and vitality and increasing that. Because many of the statues you find at these sites, especially Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe, they're all emaciated. They've got like ribs showing. Even the new statue has this. There's skinny arms. They're like almost like they're suffering. And so we postulate, hypothesize that this that they were trying to do something about that. Maybe it's a representation of what happened after the cataclysm. They were trying to, get things right again after this. But as for paranormal activity, I don't know too much about that in this particular part of the world. I've heard rumors of, interestingly, that when the horrible earthquake happened, I think early last year, or was it early this year even, and there was some very strange lights were being filmed in the sky in the whole area around Gaziantep. Now we think that's actually because you actually get earth lights, often occur before earthquakes happen, because you get all this movement under the ground. Piezoelectric effect creates these kind of balls of light and this plasma on the surface and in the sky. But when we saw the footage, it just looked like this was what the. Couldn't explain it. It didn't look like anything like balls of light, you've seen before related to earthquake zones. So that was intriguing when we saw that. But as for accounts of activity, as you're asking, I don't know too much about that in this part of the world. I haven't heard too much about it.
How much of this is still yet to be unexcavated, or how much has actually been excavated? Are we at 10% and there's 90% still out there? Because it seems like, as the Turkish officials there say, they find they're never-ending new discoveries. Like, how much do we don't know? I mean, based on how much hasn't been worked.
Well, a few months ago, they were saying, this is before this year's excavation at Karahan Tepe, they were saying 1% of the site had been uncovered, and quite a lot of it had been uncovered by then. And now they think they're kind of estimating it's probably they're nearing 5%, and whereas Göbekli Tepe is probably the same. I mean, and they've been at that for 2 or 3 decades now. Some sites haven't even started being excavated yet, So we're talking probably between 1 and 3%. I would imagine that's my estimate. Maximum 5% of all the sites, when we're looking at that, because even sites that have been, exposed, like Navali Churi, which actually got destroyed and because of the dam and the water's coming through, most of that was excavated, fortunately. So that ups the kind of percentage slightly in the whole area, but very little, really. I mean, this is why this next few years is going to be it's going to get ridiculous. We get excited about this statue and then this boar statue, but my God, there's going to be a lot more.
That being said, right, we're just scratching the surface. What if you're to just kind of postulate a little bit, like, what do you think we're going to find, or what do you hope we find? Like, you're there, you've been digging around. If you're to do your best guess, what do you think we find as we continue down this road of uncovering stuff?
It's going to be like that meme where the T-Rex has the UFO in its mouth.
Yeah,
that's what he's going to find.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to finding a proper, graveyard, like skeletons, about who these people really were, get DNA testing done and stuff like that. But, there's a LiDAR scan, a GPR scan has been done of Göbekli Tepe some years ago now. And there's and you can see the shapes of the enclosures that have been excavated yet. And one of them is about twice the size of the biggest one already exposed.
Wow.
So we're like, whoa. And one of the things I've been uncovering as well is the different geometries of these sites, which is astonishing. When I've been analyzed, it's hard to explain verbally, I have to show you images of it and stuff, but we're finding the same geometries already with so little excavated that we're finding in British stone circles. Even in Nabta Playa in Egypt is the same egg-shaped geometry as enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe, for instance, and things like this. And we're finding, and what I think we're going to find is more evidence of what we've already found of geometry, astronomy, and metrology. We're going to find evidence of who these builders were, and suddenly all these stories about the Anunnaki and watchers is all going to come true. That's what I'm predicting.
Wow,
I love that.
This might be a dumb question, but obviously the type of stone would lend to it surviving longer time periods. And some places might be building the same things, but they're using different materials. And so, like in Cusco, some of these stones are just like the type of, I think that's why it appears to be so much more magical there, because maybe they had better rocks to work with. And does that lend for the survivability of some of these ancient places? Better material?
The handy thing about the sites in southeast Turkey is that they've all been buried deliberately at the end of their use a long time ago. Civilizations that come through there not even knew they existed, so they've survived intact in almost pristine condition in some of the places, some of the areas of Göbekli Tepe, for instance. And so thankfully they did bury them, and we know that, firstly, most of it's made of limestone, different types of limestone, very high quality, some of it as well, very beautiful, smooth limestone. Some of it's quite hard, actually. And so that's not going to last if it was left on the surface too well. That's going to get weathered, over time. So the fact that it was buried as preserved and saved and kind of, made us appreciate, what there is today. I mean, because one of the weird things as well is that they preserved and repaired the sites before they buried them.
Interesting.
They put things in the right place and then buried them. They replaced things where they should be really accurately, with packed stone and rubble and earth around it, so it wouldn't get damaged. It was really neatly done.
It's like they mummified the
it's just like, I mean, just that work, that's an incredible job in its own right, just to do that. The hundreds of thousands of tons that must have been placed inside them. So imagine how hard it is for them to excavate it now.
It's just, it makes you wonder, why?
Why?
It's like the old stadiums in America that they build a new one, they retire, and they just knock it down. In this case, they just sort of filled it up, and they're like, this is the old thing, and we're just gonna keep it for posterity, I guess. But it's, what a gift in some ways, right?
The way you describe it, how it's buried like that, kind of sounds like if you've ever shipped anything overseas, something big, you want to pack it and prepare it for something. Now, on our show, we'd say that, there's a judgment coming from God. Do you think that perhaps they know this judgment's coming? They're trying to preserve their spot before this, cataclysm comes? Yeah.
Yeah, they may have been concerned about another cataclysm. Yeah, maybe that's one of the things. I mean, one of the theories actually is a gentleman called Cohen. He actually came on our tour, and he's a geologist, and he gave a lecture, and he came up with this remarkable theory as to why they buried them and moved on from the area. And he believes, and he's looked at the data, and I'm going to discuss it more with him and include this in our next book, because he claims that what was happening around the time they started burying it, which would have been 10,000 years ago, around 8,000 BC, a couple of thousand years after they kind of constructed these sites, more or less, is that the Earth's magnetic field was trying to change. It was trying to do a pole shift, but it didn't quite do it. But what happened is when that was going through that process, the magnetic field weakened so much it became almost to zero, and so all the solar energy would come through it, and it would be not only really hot, it would give people cancer, and they would like get burnt skin, and they would just be suffering all the time. Over time, it just got worse and worse. So they may have thought, right, we've got to move on, and this is when they moved on and disappeared, went somewhere else. Incidentally, this could be why they built, underground cities like Derinkuyu and Kaymakli in Cappadocia. They moved on, hoping to find another area. Maybe they couldn't find anywhere to escape the heat, but they went underground instead to do that. So that's a really strong theory, I think, and it kind of makes sense when you look at the data. So that's one idea. So that could be sensed as a kind of cataclysm, if you like, but it may be something else. Some people, there's other researchers who claim there was other kind of cometary threats coming through around that time as well. It could be a case of one of the reasons you would bury it is because by the end of its use, it's quite old. It's a couple of thousand years old. So this is a memory, preserved information and knowledge and wisdom of potentially hundreds, if not thousands of years being kept in one place. They had to preserve it. And the only thing they could think of doing it was like burying in it. And they knew sometime in the future, they're going to uncover this and realize who us people were, So I think there's elements of all these involved in why they would bury it.
It's like the time capsules we did, Nate, in elementary school, like in the 80s, right? You put all your stuff in there. You put like a cassette tape and an 8-track and who knows what else. Yeah, I don't know. Like a no fear shirt. You put it all in there.
It is interesting if they have some sort of cosmic energy that they're tapping into. It's not like oil, right? But I mean, we do that as just regular humans. When the oil field dries up, we move on, right? And it could be the same thing, but obviously they had knowledge of sort of a cosmic energy that we're just starting to scratch the surface of and know that it's there, right? Ley lines and grids and things like that are a lot of the conversations we have. But man, Hugh, I love it. It's always good to go back to the golden age and the weird times of the ancient times. Must have been wild. That's all I got to say is there must have been just weird things walking around, and who knows what it would have been like. My last question is, if you could go back to one of these sites and see it as pristine at the height of the technology, which place would you choose?
Well, it has to be, I want to go back to the final winter solstice of Karahan Tepe before they covered it over, which would fit in quite nicely with us being the first ones to witness it when it was uncovered. So that would be interesting. And we've actually tried to visualize that and kind of understand that, what it would have been like. And we're actually working with a guy now, a guy called Kevin from America, from Colorado. He's a brilliant graphic artist, and he's actually used some of my scans actually of the site, and we're trying to reproduce a kind of accurate recreation of the site and how it would have looked and everything. So I'm obsessed, and so is JJ actually, about Karahan Tepe. So that would be the place for me.
I love it.
Oh, Kevin from Colorado.
Kevin from America. That's such an American name.
I love it. Well, hey, Hugh, tell everybody about.
Shout out to Kevin from America. I love it. Sorry, Hugh.
Tell everybody about the book, where they could find it, and all the details around that. Also, as always, where they can reach you and find out what you're doing, perhaps go on a tour, perhaps interact with some of the work you're doing.
Sure, yeah. The book there. This is the book. It's Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the world's first megaliths. It's a small wooden book, one of the series. Officially, it's not quite in America yet. It's in lots of other countries. It's just filtering through. But I think you can actually order it weirdly on Amazon.co.uk, and it's actually in America, and it will get sent from America within America. I don't know why that is, and also it's published by Wooden Books, and they have a website, woodenbooks.com, which you can get it from. But yeah, and it'll be out and about in different languages all over the world in the next couple of years. And me and JJ are working on a bigger book as well, which is much more in depth, going into some of the subjects we'll talk about, getting into some of the more obscure subjects as well. And we're like, people can go to megalithomania.co.uk, and we run a couple of tours in May and September out to Turkey to all these sites, and we've got really good access. We know all the families. We get kind of private access and things like that. It's great. And we run a whole bunch of other trips, and we need this because this funds our research, because we're completely self-funded. We kind of have to kind of manage our kind of manage that carefully. We run a couple of conferences. Our big conference is in May, a Megalithomania in Glastonbury. We do the Origins conference in November as well. Yeah, and people can just search for Hugh Newman. They'll find all sorts of stuff.
I love it. I feel like the Blurryverse and some of our members have been posting photos. I think a bunch of guys when Graham was in Peru last time, a bunch of Blurry listeners took some photos with him and sent them to us. And
cool.
It's kind of cool. Like the fan base is spreading and people are in the Blurryverse, and appreciate that.
Yeah, we're grateful, Hugh. We're grateful that you spent some time with us, man. And become a friend of the show. It's good to see you, man. I know it's late in the UK, so thanks for burning the midnight oil with us today.
Yeah, that's totally cool. Really enjoy it, actually. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm just fascinated by all this, because you get some such cool obscure information. People talking about giant footprints and Bigfoot in obscure places. You got poor old Timothy Alberino getting abducted by aliens in Peru. Oh my God, it's all happening. So you're really kind of on it, aren't you?
Thanks, you.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we wonder like what people think about our show, but you try to have more of a, we don't take ourselves too seriously, but we do take the content very seriously. And I think sometimes people think that it's just a joke to us, but we just try to make it fun for people, because everyone's coming at this from a different angle. Some people come from the Sasquatch angle, some people come from the archaeological angle or the theological angle, and we're all just trying to make it an interesting soup that everyone can get something out of. And speaking of turkey, we're just a couple of turkeys asking questions, and I appreciate you.
But I'll tell you what, Hugh,
listening to us.
If you really want to make Nate's year this year, if you just send him a little blurb on the Black Pyramid for Christmas, he'll be a very happy man.
Yeah. And Hugh, Luke's been doing some drawings of those 7-foot tall phallic things, so he wants to compete with Kevin from America as a graphic designer.
Just let me put my hat in the ring. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like super bad. I can draw one thing. I can draw one thing.
I'm a bit worried, but yeah, okay, that sounds great.
We kid. No, it's great. It's great to see you, Hugh. Thanks again.
Thanks, dude.
Man, yeah, love your work. I would love to get out there. Maybe one of these days, once we family gets a little older and able to travel with kids, we can get out. I'd love to come one of your tours and see Karahan Tepe and see. I mean, that's on the bucket list. So, and if you're ever in Nashville, Tennessee, you better look us up because we're around here. So appreciate it, brother. Good to see you.
We'll take you to see a squatch. They're out here.
Maybe.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Sounds like a plan. All right. Thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'll keep tuning in as well.
Thanks,
all right,
brother.
buddy.
Good to see you.
Have a good night.